The story of Machaon, the journey from son of Asclepius to becoming the first combat medic, practicing trauma medicine on the battlefields of Troy. There are two tools that follow Machaon all his life. One curves like the crescent moon and glints like a promise half kept. The other coils, patient and vertical, as though it remembers something older than men. A scythe and a staff, harvest and healing, division and support. It is best to begin before he carries either. He was born into the quiet shadow of a god who interfered. Asclepius, his father, was not born divine. He became inconveniently effective. That is a more dangerous achievement. It is one thing to heal a fever, it is another to make death feel negotiable. Zeus, as you know, is tolerant of worship, but not competition. Lightning, therefore, entered the family history. But before thunder, there was instruction. Machaon's childhood was not spent in temples heavy with incense, but in the dry clarity of mountain air. Pelion is a place where herbs grow stubbornly, as if competing with rock for the right to exist. His father taught him to kneel before plants before he ever stood over a patient. Look first, Asclepius would say. Hands are impatient, eyes are wiser. Hygiaia, eldest of the sisters, kept order. You may recognize her name. It lingers still in our word hygiene, though the ancients meant something gentler by it. Not sterilization, but balance. Cleanliness as harmony. Panacea was positive about everything and believed sincerely that somewhere there must be a cure for every ailment. Her name, of course, has traveled into modern ambition. Panacea, the cure-all, universal remedy. Acheso and Iaso moved more quietly, attending to recovery and recuperation, those slow, unglamorous phases after crisis. They were not magicians, they were observers. The first lesson was smell. Rot has gradations. A wound that smells sweet is more treacherous than one that reeks openly. Sweetness suggests something feasting quietly. Even without speaking of invisible organisms, concepts millennia away, people knew that certain odors foretold decline. Bronze, when pressed against flesh, altered that trajectory. They did not speak of copper ions. They noticed fewer funerals. Wine stung. It also cleansed. Honey sealed and protected. Yarrow stemmed bleeding. Willow bark dulled pain. None of these were miracles. All required judgment. Machaon learned to wait. His father did not rush him to patience. First, he watched the tending of animals. A shepherd's ram torn by thorn and rock. A hound gored by a boar. Flesh speaks plainly if you are willing to listen. Shock, though they did not use the word, has a look. The pallor that creeps inward from lips. The tremor that does not belong to cold. The silence that replaces protest. The boy's first true patient was a woodcutter who misjudged an oak. The trunk fell as trunks do, without apology. The man's thigh opened like a split fig. Blood moved with alarming purpose. Machaon froze. This is important. Competence begins with terror acknowledged, not denied. Asclepius did not intervene immediately. He let his son feel the weight of choice. Then, calmly, he pressed wool to artery, angled limb, commanded compression. Now, he said. Machaon's hands obeyed memory before courage. Yarrow packed. Wine poured. Pressure sustained. The man survived the night. Not because of divine favor, but because bleeding can be persuaded if addressed promptly and firmly. Later alone, Machaon sighed, not from horror, but from relief. Relief is an underrated teacher. It teaches restraint. The scythe entered his training early. It was not for wheat. Its curve allowed clean cuts through dead tissue. You see, rot spreads if left to negotiate. To save the limb, one must sometimes sacrifice flesh. The instrument gleamed in his father's hand, not as threat, but as boundary. Hubris, Asclepius once told him, sharpening the blade, is not believing you can heal. It is believing you can heal everything. Zeus listened to make sure no one pushed the boundaries of mortality. The story of resurrection is often told with embellishment. Here is the simpler truth. Asclepius became too skilled at reversing what others considered final. Whether he restored breath to one who had drowned too long, or merely delayed a death that would have occurred regardless, we cannot say. What we know is that lightning answered. The strike was not metaphor. Machaon smelled ozone before he understood loss. His father stood outlined in white brilliance, staff lifted as if in argument. The sky split. Sound arrived after light, as it always does. When hearing returned, silence had altered shape. Achezo reached first. Hygiea did not scream. Panacea did. The mountain did not intervene. There is a peculiar stillness in a body struck by lightning. Not charred ruin as poets prefer, but a disruption, like a harp string snapped mid-note. Machaon touched his father's wrist out of habit. No pulse. The discipline of years told him what grief refused to accept. Zeus had made a point. That evening the sisters gathered, no incense, no theatrics, only clarity. Asclepius had crossed a boundary. They would not. Machaon took the staff. The serpent, real, not symbolic, coiled of its own accord, drawn to warmth. Serpents shed skin. Renewal without denial of mortality. The lesson was implicit. He swore then, not aloud, not ceremonially, that he would never promise what nature could not sustain. Heal where possible, relieve where necessary, refuse resurrection. You may think this vow modest. It is not. It is discipline against the oldest temptation. News of Troy came like a fever, a city besieged, alliances fracturing, heroes swelling with grievance. War, as it does, promised glory and delivered infection. Agamemnon gathered ships at Aulis, Achilles brooded, Odysseus calculated, men sharpened spears, few sharpened judgment, they sent for healers. Machaon did not hesitate long. War magnifies injury. Therefore, it magnifies necessity. Podalirius, his brother, would accompany him. Between them, they carried herbs wrapped in linen, bronze instruments polished, honey sealed in clay. On the morning he left Pelion, the mountain air seemed almost reproachful. Hygiea embraced him with a firmness that brooked no melodrama. Panacea pressed into his hand a small vial of willow extract. "For when they roar," she said. He smiled despite himself. Before departure, he visited the place where lightning had struck. The stone bore no mark. That is often the way with catastrophe. The earth absorbs what men cannot. He knelt. "Limits," he murmured, not to Zeus, not to his father, but to himself. The scythe hung at his side. The staff rested in his grip, harvest and healing. At Aulis, the air was thick with impatience. Thousands of men confined by windless days grow restless. Minor injuries fester faster in boredom. Blisters, infections, fevers from brackish water. Machaon began immediately, establishing order. Separate the wounded from the well. Boil water when possible. Rotate dressings, air wounds when the sun permitted. The soldiers watched him with curiosity at first. He did not chant. He did not invoke thunder. He cleaned, he drained, he cut when required. One youth, pierced in the abdomen by an accidental sparring thrust, trembled beneath his hands. The smell was wrong already, sweet, indicating gangrene, dangerous. Machaon opened the wound wider, allowing corruption to escape. It is counterintuitive, but many truths are. Drainage saves, concealment kills. The boy survived 3 days. Then fever claimed him. Machaon did not disguise the failure. He sat beside the body and memorized the progression. Knowledge purchased dearly is rarely forgotten. Wind finally came. Sails snapped into purpose. Troy awaited. As the fleet cut across wine-dark water, Machaon stood at the prow of his vessel. He was ready for war, not in the conventional sense, yet he understood the risk in battle more intimately than most. Spears pierce, blades cleave, panic spreads faster than flame. He would meet all of it. You may imagine him resolute. He was. But he was also aware, keenly, that war would test the boundary he had sworn to maintain. When heroes fall, the cry is always the same: save him at any cost. And there lies the temptation. The coast of Troy rose ahead, bright and indifferent. Somewhere within its walls lived men who would bleed as red as Greeks. Flesh does not carry allegiance. Machaon tightened the leather binding of the grip of the rod of Machaon, scythe glistening in reflection. The serpent shifted upon the staff, tasting air. He stepped onto foreign sand, not as conqueror nor as priest, but as something rarer, a practitioner of battlefield medicine. Behind him lay lightning and lesson. Before him, life and death. The war had begun.